All right. Hello, everyone. This is Humera Fasihuddin standing in for Tara Rahmani for Life's Not Linear. And we are here today with Leah Newman of Milwaukee School of Engineering. Dr. Leah Newman, Professor Leah Newman, who I am just getting to know today, and Tara has raved about. I'm really excited to get to know you, Leah. Perhaps you could start by just an introduction of you.
Okay, well, as mentioned, I am Dr. Leah Newman. I'm originally from Chicago, Illinois. I went to school at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where I got all of my degrees, bachelor's, master's, and PhD, all in industrial engineering. My master's and PhD work have an emphasis in ergonomics or human factors. Um, I spent about 4 years teaching at Pennsylvania State University in their industrial engineering department, industrial and manufacturing engineering department. And then I moved here to Milwaukee, where I began work at the Milwaukee School of Engineering, as mentioned. I've been here for 13 years, so September will mark the beginning of my 14th year at MSOE. And this last year, I became the program director for the industrial engineering program. So I'm now actually an associate professor at the Milwaukee School of Engineering in the industrial engineering program, which is part of the mechanical engineering department. And as mentioned, also the program director. And I'm happy to be here.
I'm so excited to have you. What an incredible background, and just so accomplished. I actually had a chance to scan your 6-page academic CV, and it's amazing. You are so well published. You've worked in industry. You've done consulting. You have patented things. You've spoken in many different places. It's pretty. You have such an incredible background, and I really respect the institutions that you've been a part of. I've not been to Penn State, but we've done quite a bit of work there. And I've been to University of Wisconsin Madison, which is an incredible institution. Incredible research institution, lots of innovation and entrepreneurship that took place there. So I can see how that would have really informed your work and what you bring to the Milwaukee School of Engineering.
Well, thank you. Actually, I just do have to correct you a little bit. I have not patented anything.
Okay.
But I have.
Overrated. Patents are overrated.
There you go. I know people who have patented things. So.
Yeah, exactly. I haven't patented anything either, but we still go about making lots of change, right? We can't patent it still.
And it's still impactful.
Exactly. That's right. You don't need a patent in order to do some pretty great things in life. So, I think what the thing that really strikes me is that, as people of color, I really appreciate that you are a Black woman in engineering, that you've been schooled at some pretty white Midwestern institutions. And you've taught at very large white institutions. How did you make those selections of where to be? What state and region did you come from? And how did that transition go to those different places as a person of color?
Well, I'm originally from the South Side of Chicago.
Right. You mentioned that. Sorry.
No, it's fine. Which is predominantly, where I came from, predominantly Black. I went to a Black high school, Black elementary school, grew up around, Black families. And one of my English teachers, interestingly enough, excuse me, she was my English teacher in my senior year of high school. And she had a huge impact on me in that she said for her and her family, she was able to afford to send her children to private institutions for their primary education. So her kids went to private institutions for like K-12. And she said they were predominantly white. And she wanted her kids to get a balanced view of the world, if you will. So her kids went to HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities, for
Love
college.
them. Great respect for them.
Yes.
Yeah.
For me, when she said that, she and I had a conversation. She said, you have had the benefit of going to a Black institution for K-12.
Mm.
And in order for you to get that balance, you should consider going to a predominantly white institution, because you're not going to be able to avoid it when you get out of school.
It is the reality.
Yes. So that's why I focused on those types of institutions. And when I was in high school, I was part of like the principal scholars and the honors program. And we would visit different college campuses, different institutions in the area. We had gone to the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. We had gone to Purdue, and we went to UW-Madison. And quite frankly, I chose Madison because one, I thought it was, of the schools we had visited, I thought it was one of the most beautiful campuses I had ever seen, where the campus is actually, has two lakes on either side of it. The greenery and the beauty of the campus was just like overwhelming in a positive way. And then I met a few people there who at the time were very, it seemed, devoted to diversity and inclusion. And this one recruiter there would come back to whenever he came to Chicago, he would come to my high school and he would pull me out of class to talk to me. He would call me on the phone. And so he made sure to develop that relationship with me. And so, yeah, I only applied to one university, University of Wisconsin-Madison. I said,
Wow.
if I don't get in, then I'm in trouble. But yeah, I got in and that's where I went to school. So
That's pretty great. So what was that like going from a predominantly Black elementary school and high school? I'm assuming the faculty also mirrored the demographic, and to go to a predominantly white, large collegiate experience.
Yeah, one of my, we had what we call divisions in high school as opposed to home school or home room. And my division teacher was a white man who had been educated at Harvard, but wanted to come back to the inner city of Chicago to help educate young people. And I say this all the time. I preface what I'm about to say with, I say this not to brag, but to provide perspective and context. I graduated valedictorian of my high school class. And this teacher of mine pulled me aside when he found out I was going to UW-Madison. And he's like, Leah, you're about to go to one of the toughest schools in the country, if not the world. And you have to keep in mind that you were educated in the Chicago public school system. So things are going to be challenging for you. He said, you are not used to this, but you are likely to get your first C at UW-Madison. You are likely to get your first D at UW-Madison. You may even get an F at UW-Madison. But I want you to know that you have what it takes to succeed. And when that happens, I don't want you to give up, because too many people give up. He's like, I want you to keep fighting. He's like, because we have not adequately prepared you for what you are about to experience at that institution. But I want you to know that you have what it takes to get through that institution. And so him kind of sharing that with me helped, because when my parents and my brother dropped me off, I was like, okay, let's put the stuff back in the car. I want to go back home, because it was unlike anything I had ever seen or experienced. So it was overwhelming to be the only Black person in the dorm. It was overwhelming to sometimes be the only Black person in a lecture hall that had 200, 300 or more students. It was overwhelming to be the only Black female or person in some of the smaller class. It was just overwhelming on all fronts. And there were people who would look at me funny, like, what are you doing here?
Oh, yeah.
And there are experiences that I've shared with Tara, and I've shared with other students who, sometimes they hit that wall and they don't know if they have what it takes to finish. And I'm like, yeah, you do. And one of my first experiences at UW-Madison, not a positive one, I was in, and I'm going to date myself here, but I was in a drafting class. And so the people who don't know what drafting is, it's like the older version of like CAD, right?
Exactly. Before they had
AutoCAD.
CAD software, they did it all by
Yes,
hand.
all by hand.
T-squares and all.
Yes. So I was in a drafting class and I was sitting in between two white male students. And one of the students to my left had a question for the instructor. Instructor came over and answered his question, and I was listening in because I had a similar question. When he finished, I said, okay, that makes sense. I have another question to piggyback off of that. And I asked my question, and the professor, now I will say this, I don't remember if he actually answered my question. I don't remember what my question was, but I remember this. He said to me, Leah, it's not your fault you don't understand, because you people just aren't as smart as the rest of us. You're here and the rest of us are here, and you have to make all of this up. And that's all I remember hearing. And that was one of my first experiences there. And so there were several experiences like that where there were assumptions being made about me and my friends because we were Black or because they were Hispanic or, fill in the blank, right? And we were studying engineering. There was this feeling that was visceral at the time that we didn't belong there. And several of my friends ended up transferring out of Madison. There are people who were maybe a semester or a year from graduating who said, I just can't take this anymore. So I'm leaving. And I don't care if I have to do, extra years to make up classes. I just can't do this anymore. And so that was a lot of the experience. I was fortunate in that once I stumbled upon industrial engineering as a career path, I took a human factors class because I started out in college wanting to do electrical engineering, electrical and computer engineering. Well, you needed to have a 3.5 cumulative GPA after taking 3 calc classes and all these other classes in order to even apply to the electrical engineering department. And so I didn't have that. And then I had an internship doing electrical engineering work at IBM, and I didn't like it. And then I said, okay, well, maybe mechanical, and hence like the drafting classes, because in high school I enjoyed drafting. And then I had an internship at a company called Control Data doing mechanical engineering stuff, and I didn't like that. And so I remember Madison has a campus bus, and I remember riding the campus bus, like, what am I gonna do with my life, right? And a roommate of mine was an industrial engineering student. And she said, Leah, take this human factors class with me. And I said, okay. So I took the human factors class and fell in love with human factors and all that it represented, loved the professor, but I was struggling with everything else. And my GPA wasn't very high. It was probably like a 2.3 or 2.4. And I was thinking about transferring to another school myself. And the professor of that class said, do you trust me? And I said, I don't know. And he's like, well, I want to help you. And he's like, if you can hang on for one more year, I will be able to help you. And so I did. He became the chair of the IE department. And so he helped me to get into the IE department, because he said, again, through the work that you're doing in my class, I know that you're capable of doing it, you know? And so I was fortunate to have found him to help me. But originally, I wanted to be an attorney. But I'm very practical and logical, and I said, okay, I love history, I love political science, but what if I can't go to law school? Will I be able to find a job with a degree in history or political science? I don't know. So you like math and science, so let's do engineering as a backup, and then you can still go to law school. So that was the plan, but but life is not linear.
No, life is not linear. And for one thing, the world is full of lawyers. We have plenty of them. There are many good ones, and there are many of them. But I'm really glad. We need more Black women, more people of color in engineering.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's the only way, I think, that we'll be able to change some of our major systems, both
absolutely
in India and in corporate and research dollars in the US. So I'm really glad that you're there.
Thank you.
There's so much in what you just said. I'm in the middle of an incredible book. You may have heard of it. It's called How to Be an Anti-Racist by Kendi. Chapter 8, Behavior. They talk about, and I was just listening to this morning, about the greatest invention for some people to quantify how we are here and you are here was standardized testing, SAT scores. And Lord knows if SAT scores determined my future, I would not be able to accomplish nearly half of what I was able to accomplish. Can you tell me a little bit about your perspective on that whole thing?
Well, I didn't take the SAT. I took the ACT, same kind of thing. And yeah, I believe I scored like a 24. So for engineering, they would say that that's not very good at all. And at the time, I don't think I understood all of the implications of race and how that kind of played into the development of these tests and these test questions. And so, of course, you take this test, people say you're not good enough, you're not smart enough. You internalize that, right? And so it becomes this constant struggle that, if I'm to be honest, I still have sometimes today, of, am I good enough, So yeah, clearly, like you said, if the ACT determined my path, if GPA determined my path, I wouldn't be where I am. I have students who come to me now and say, I'll never be able to get a graduate degree. And I'm like, why not? Well, because I have a 2.5. And I said, well, let me tell you something. I had a 2.4 when I graduated from college. You can go to grad school, right? It's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be linear. You're going to have to do some things. You're going to have to find some people to support you, but it is still possible for you to go to grad school if that's what you want to do. So yeah, trying to have those conversations. I was having a conversation with someone the other day, and I said, at what point does something that I say cease to be an excuse, and it's just part of my narrative? It's just part of my story. It's just a fact, right? And so that's one thing that I've encountered a lot. When you try to talk about why, for instance, your ACT score or SAT score is what it is, or you try to talk about why your GPA is what it is. Oh, that's an excuse. No, that's the reality, right? And if we really want to do something about this and make a change, we need to be honest with ourselves and be willing to accept and understand that this is the reality. And that, for lack of a better way to put it, it's just not fair. The playing ground is not level. It's just not, you know.
Well, and this is, when they talk about dismantling structural racism, that sounds so large and so, you know, big. But actually, when you break it down into its constituent parts, this is an example, in my view, of structural racism, where,
Absolutely.
Who's designing a test that says, this is what intelligence looks like. You need to know these things that we people over here know and value. And you're from there, doesn't matter. This is a equal, no, it's not equal. It is very unequal. That, plus the fact that, well, and this one really bothers me, and I don't want to take us off onto a political tangent or a tangent about structural racism, but the only other thing I'll say is that communities of color are where tax money is not. And that's what's funding our urban schools. And so you have amazing educators making choices about not necessarily even cutting math and art, art and music, but rather cutting math and science. And that is not okay.
Yeah.
That's not okay. So anyways.
I mean, to your point, when I was in high school, they had programs where you could go, I'm sorry, I was in elementary school. They had programs where you could go to the high school and get a leg up and take classes early. And I signed up to take, when I was in 8th grade, to go to the local high school to take algebra. And I couldn't do it because they didn't have enough resources in place to make that happen, right? So I ended up taking a Spanish class, which is fine. But to your point, I wanted to kind of move forward and get a leg up in the math part, and was unable to do that. So that was very disappointing.
And what equity looks like is additional supports that help you get to that, get to that goal, because everyone has the human capacity. If you really understand the growth mindset, we all have the ability to acquire mastery over these things. So why have these artificial barriers? It sounds to me like you found those supports, and you also had some great mentors in your life. Your English teacher in senior year, your the chair of the industrial engineering department, and there's something to being open to that, to being willing to receive, to be those kinds of mentorship opportunities exist for our students. In fact, Real Industry provides mentorship for underserved minorities in just about every discipline they have an interest in getting into, from software engineering to artist and repertoire and identifying, breaking, artist management. But the students don't necessarily always come, and there's like this barrier we're trying to crack. What would you say to the student who has not yet surrounded themselves with a mentor who can help guide them through this very this path wrought with self-doubt and a lot of negative messages of, can you do it and can you not? What would you say to people, young people now, who are faced with those opportunities to potentially be mentored or be bold?
I've said to students, in fact, as a professor here, you're not by yourself. You're not the first person to go through this. And they always say, oh, Dr. Newman, you don't understand. And it's like, no, you don't understand. Because what you see is the end product, right? You don't see the journey that person went through to get to the end product. And so, I tell them, you said be bold. That's huge. And the other thing I tell them is you have to be willing to be vulnerable, right?
Yes.
You have to be willing. And so for me, I try to be as transparent as possible. I, I used to be ashamed of my story when I was younger. So I get that feeling. As I've gotten older, I've come to accept that it's what makes me who I am. And I'm very proud of that. And so I do tell them you need to not only surround yourself with a mentor, but you need to surround yourself with multiple mentors, people from different backgrounds who have different perspectives, who can help you navigate the stuff that you don't quite understand yet and help you to understand some of the obstacles that, the obstacles are what help you to grow and make you stronger. That if it was easy, everybody would do it, right? And so, I think a lot of the students that I've encountered, at least through MSOE, seem to be open to the idea of mentors. We are still working on some of the younger students, some of the high school, middle school, elementary school students, to help them to understand the importance of, for instance, pre-college programming, because you can start developing your mentor pool there, right? By interacting with students in high school, if you're younger, students in college, professors, people from industry. And I have some colleagues here at MSOE, and we've been trying to work on some programming that creates like that pipeline where we have the young kids in K-12 working on, say, a robotics project. So they're interacting with each other, they're interacting with college students, they're interacting with college professors, and then we want to bring an industry component in so that they can interact there as well. And so that industry can tell us what they need so that as college professors, we can work on those educational goals and practices to give industry what they need, and then kind of take it back to K-12 to try to develop that pipeline. But yeah, my biggest, I shared recently with two students who were supposed to have graduated from MSOE, but circumstances happened and they had to leave without finishing. Well, they came back, two Hispanic students. They came back to finish their degree, and they're in my office and almost in tears because of the struggle. And I had a heart-to-heart with them and told them my GPA was a 2.4 when I graduated. I interacted with these people who saw something good in me and wanted to help. And I said, and so if you don't give up, if you do the same thing, people will see what you're capable of and people will be willing to help you. You're going to find those people who are naysayers. You got to let that roll off your back, forget that, and find the people who are going to support you, because they do exist. So, and it was interesting looking at their faces, because again, they had this image of me, I'm sure, of this person who graduated with, I don't know, 3.58 GPA and sat on top of the world. And that's just not, I do sit on top of the world, but I had a circuitous route in getting there, right? And that's okay.
GPA is definitely not a measure of intelligence
No,
or capabilities. In fact, we
no.
see this with some of our brightest students that are participating in my programs, not only at Real Industry, but also at Stanford, that it's the students who actually take the time to lift their head up out of the books
Yeah.
and aren't obsessed with the 4.0, getting
Yep.
it right on that test, who are actually observing the world, curious, able to make connections, able to reflect and synthesize, able to create impactful, valuable things that change the world. And,
Absolutely.
and I think that we have to help our young people, particularly underserved minorities, realize that what they may not have in numbers on standardized tests or GPA, they make up for in understanding the world.
Yeah, and their experiences.
That's right.
Absolutely.
That's right.
Absolutely.
And I think we things will change ultimately.
Yeah.
So what you say about being vulnerable and is also I just want to acknowledge that, in order to recognize that there are areas for improvement and be willing to be coached, you need to be coachable. So that
Mm-hmm.
vulnerability is really important, and it doesn't always exist in the academic environment
Yep.
where knowing is the currency.
Yep.
And so how, as an academic professional, how did that play out in academia? Being, having to know versus being vulnerable. I mean, academia sounds like a bucolic place, but actually it can be quite cutthroat. So
It,
I just signed up a change.org petition for an incredible Black woman at, I think, Michigan University or University of Michigan, Michigan State, one of the MU systems, who was denied tenure.
mm,
And she's very well published. She sits on 16 committees, 3 of which she leads. She just sounds like an incredible human being. So just how did academia work out?
yeah, I was very naive when I first started out. And I can remember being in college, in graduate school, and saying, yeah, I want to go to academia because industry is so cutthroat, and sometimes industry is very unethical, and I want to be able to accomplish things, and so I'm going to go to academia. And it wasn't until I got into academia that it's like, yeah, academia has its cutthroatness as well, right?
Sure does.
And for some, they would say it's worse than industry. For me, I had the opportunity to teach when I was still in graduate school, and it was quite frankly tiring to try to sit, to stand in front of the class to pontificate, right? All of these things that I apparently know. It was tiring to try to pretend like you knew everything all the time.
Yes.
And so I decided early on when I was teaching and still in college that I was just going to be completely open with my students. And when they would ask a question, if I didn't know the answer, I had professors, in fact, coach me and say, if a student asks you a question and you don't know the answer, don't ever say you don't know. They said, stop and think and then maybe say something. And I said, and you don't think the students understand that you're bluffing, that you're just kind of wasting time, that you really don't know what's going on? I said, I can't do that. And so a student asks me a question, I don't know the answer. I said, you know what? I don't know the answer to that question, but we can find out the answer to that question. And you're going to help me. So, you do some research, I'm going to do some research. And then next class, we're going to talk about that at the top of the class. And what I learned was that students were so appreciative of me saying I didn't know, because it made it okay for them to not know, right? To understand that nobody knows everything, even about the subject that they've immersed themselves in and spent so much time studying. You still don't know everything about that topic. And it's okay to say you don't know. It's not okay to not find out, right? It's not okay to not try to continuously learn, but it's okay to not know in a moment, right? And so it was challenging for me. I mentioned at the top that I started at Penn State. Um, I didn't get tenure at Penn State. I felt as I was there that for me, it was more important for me to interact with students. That's where my joy came, in that, and not necessarily so much in the traditional teaching in the classroom, but one of the beautiful things at Penn State, I would have students from all cultures and backgrounds who would come into my office to just talk about, you name it. We talk about politics, religion, you know, what TV show was on. And sometimes students would come into my office and say, Dr. Newman, I don't have anywhere else to go between classes. Is it okay if I sit in your office? We don't have to talk about anything. I'm like, sure. So they'd sit in my office and they'd have their spot and they'd work on their stuff. I'd work on my stuff. If they had a question, we'd talk. That was the best part. And I remember right before leaving, I had at any given time when I wasn't working, I could have like 5 or 6 students just sitting on the floor and in the chairs. And we were just talking and learning about each other and learning about each other's cultures and each other's, families and backgrounds. And students appreciated that so much, as did I. And when the students would graduate, their parents would come. And I remember one young man who was one of my advisees, his mother came up to me and she said, "I just want to say thank you. Our child talked about you so much." And she's like, for a parent, there's nothing that's more gratifying than knowing that when you send your child away to go far away from home to school, that there is someone there who's looking out for their best interest and who supports them. And she's like, "So I just want to thank you for doing that for our son." And I'm not thinking I'm doing that for him, but it was just such a gratifying feeling. And I realized early on that that was what was more important to me, not the research, not the publishing papers, and not that there's anything wrong with that. And I still work on that stuff, but I just didn't want my life to be, to revolve around that. I preferred my life to revolve around the students themselves and developing those relationships and trying to help educate and help them learn, and then also learn from them. So
Share those values of having students be at the center. And if only all educators were like you, Dr. Newman.
You're very kind.
Last question, and I know I'm over time, and Tara's never going to let me do this again. But final words of advice for students who are graduating high school and coming into college, graduating college, and trying to figure out how they're going to make their life work out in this pandemic, racially unrestful time. What would you say to them right now?
You mentioned, mindset and having a growth mindset. I think it's important to try to stay there, and to understand that even during what seems like the most dire situations or dire times, that there still exist opportunities during those times, and that sometimes, particularly for those of us in, engineering, it's often during the most, what's perceived as the most dire time, where some of the best innovations come forth. So if you can allow yourself some time to focus on that, on how do we turn these challenges into opportunities, that will give you, I think, a lot of energy, inspiration, motivation, and know that this too shall pass, right? And I always have these little pearls where it's like, that which does not kill us makes us stronger. All of those things are true. Okay. And so they are graduating in perhaps scary times, but perhaps some of the most interesting times as well. And so look for the opportunities, and don't be afraid to be vulnerable, right?
Well said. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
It's such a great pleasure to get to know you.
The pleasure was mine. It was great chatting with you. And if I can be of help in the future, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you for that.
Thank
All right.
You.
Have a great day.
Take care. You too. Be well.
Thank you.
Bye.